In this list, we'll be going over the worst cards that require 2 tributes, which basically means we'll be going over level 7 or higher monsters that can't special summon themselves, and are not inherently part of an archetype that revolves around special summoning them. And at number 10, we have Garzett. This is a level 7 monster which requires 2 tributes, and its effect is that its attack becomes the combined original attack of the 2 monsters that you tribute for its tribute summon. So if you have 2 monsters in the field that have abilities that allow them to come out into the field easier but with a lower attack power value, like Beast King Barbaros, or monsters with high attack that restrict other attacks, like Malefic Cyber and Dragon, then you could tribute both of those cards in order to get a super strong Garzett in the field. Tributing a Beast King Barbaros and a Malefic Cyber and Dragon would result in 7,000 attack, for example, which definitely sounds more impressive than it actually is, because this is all requiring a tribute summon to accomplish, playing those kinds of cards and getting them on the field in the first place, and then of course there's the whole problem with the card that it has absolutely no inherent protection. So if your opponent just has any form of disruption, then you're basically just painting a huge target on this card's back, because you have to put in a lot of resources in order to get it out as a big beat stick. There are other versions of this card which are a lot better, like Great Garzett, which is a level 6 monster that only requires a single tribute, and when you bring it out, it has double the attack of the monster tributed. So, in the same examples I gave for Garzett, if you instead just tributed a single Malefic Cyber and Dragon for Great Garzett, you'd have an 8,000 attack beat stick on the field, while using 1 less card. And Great Garzett isn't that good either. There's also the legendary Garzett, which is much better as it can special summon itself from the hand by distributing all the monsters you control. Then it gains attack equal to all the original attacks of the monster distributed, and it also has piercing battle damage, so it's just much better of a bigger beat stick than the normal Garzett. And the legendary Garzett actually saw some competitive play in a deck that was trying to turbo out number 95 Galaxy Eyes Dark Matter Dragon. Although Garzett is just a way too slow, very vulnerable level 7 monster, where every single other card that's similar to him is much better, especially Grand Daiza, which has seen the most amount of play out of all of the Majus. And at number 9, we have Sword Hunter. This is a level 7 monster which has the effect that if it destroys a monster by battle and sends it to the graveyard, you can equip every monster it destroys to this card as an equipped spell card, where it gains the effect to give this monster 200 attack. So if it destroys a single monster by battle, its attack will go up to 2650, which is still kind of low for a 2 tribute monster, seeing as level 6 monsters can get up to 2500 attack. And while the effect is a unique one, where it equips monsters it destroys to increase its power, it's very obviously an early YuGiOh card, which is very underpowered for the amount of effort required to bring it out. As again, one of the requirements for the cards to be on this list is that they don't inherently special summon themselves, and aren't part of an archetype which is obviously meant to special summon them, like Armed Dragon level 7 for example. However, according to Wikipedia, there are some spicy combos you can pull off with this card's unique effect, which is normally not possible with other cards that don't convert monsters they destroy into equipped spell cards. You could use all of this free advantage in order to summon out Anteater Eating Ant, which normally has an atrocious summoning condition where you have to send 2 spell or trap cards you control to the graveyard in order to special summon it from your hand, but has a good effect where once per turn it can destroy a spell or trap card, just at the cost of being able to attack that turn. With Sword Hunter, you can offset its terrible summoning condition to make it not as much of a -2 in guard advantage. And of course, you can also use the spell card Release Restraint Wave in order to send one of the equipped cards to the graveyard to destroy all of your opponent's face-down spell and traps. None of these combos really make Sword Hunter worth playing, but I do like how Wikipedia gives tips on how these cards could be useful, so I'll mention them at a couple of other spots in this video when relevant. And at number 8, we have Arcana Force 18, the Moon. This is a level 7 monster which has the effect that when it's summoned you get to toss a coin in order to determine which effect it has on the field, where if you get a heads, its effect becomes basically Jam Breeding Machine, where you get to special summon a token during each of your standby phases. If you get a tails, however, its effect becomes, during each of your end phases you have to give control of one monster you control to your opponent. So the heads effect of getting a token during each of your standby phases is pretty neat. That's just a pure +1 in card advantage every turn, and there's lots of decks that can make use of tokens. However, giving control of one of your monsters to your opponent is incredibly bad, and literally a -2 in card advantage, as you lose 1 card and your opponent is gaining 1 card in the process. So that's a pretty terrible downside, where if you compare it to its upside, it's not really worth the risk. And in Arcana Force decks, they do have ways in order to force a heads effect. That way, you don't have to get the tails effect ever. However, the Arcana Force archetype is absolutely terrible, and they're not very good at facilitating 2 tribute summons. And if they are going to facilitate a 2 tribute monster, they would probably want to use it on Arcana Force 21, the World, for a chance at being able to skip your opponent's turn. And if you were to play it outside of an Arcana Force deck, well, its effects are just not good enough to risk the tails effect. And it's too hard to bring out even if you could force a heads effect pretty easily, like using the skill in Duel Links, which allows you to get a heads effect for your first 3 coin tosses. Although, there are some useful applications of giving your opponent a card, like if you give them a card which is only detrimental to the person who controls it, like Ra's Disciple, which doesn't allow you to special summon while it's on the field. And since the heads effect is technically kind of okay, it's not on a higher spot on this list. And at number 7, we have Great Poseidon Beetle. This is a level 7 monster with 2500 attack and has the effect that if it attacks a face-up attack position monster, and that monster is not destroyed by that battle, this card can attack the same monster again in a row, and this effect can be used twice per turn. So if your opponent is playing Spirit Reaper Beatdown and they have a battle immune Spirit Reaper on their side of the field, you could bring out Poseidon Beetle in order to attack into it 3 times and deal 6600 points of damage with its effect, which I assume was the intended purpose of this card. Attacking into battle immune monsters because the card itself doesn't help its case at all. It doesn't actually stop the monsters attacking from being destroyed by battle, like Lunalight Cat Dancer can, who has a similar effect. Although being a main deck, high-level monster, it's infinitely less easier to use than an extra deck monster like Lunalight Cat Dancer. And if you're trying to counter a deck full of battle immune monsters, I still probably wouldn't recommend playing Great Poseidon Beetle, unless you just want a hilarious way to counter them. Mainly because the resources required to bring out 2 tribute monsters are just generally not worth it, unless that 2 tribute monster does something amazing, like Ether the Heavenly Monarch. And even that card has a whole archetype dedicated to allowing you to bring it out easier. And at number 6, we have Storm Shooter. This is a level 7 monster with only 2300 attack, so on the low end for a high level monster, and it has the effect where, once per turn you can activate one of its 2 effects. Its first effect you can choose allows you to move it to an adjacent unoccupied monster card zone. The other effect you can choose allows you to bounce a spell, trap, or monster card on your opponent's side of the field in the same column as this card. So being able to bounce a monster is nice. Only being able to bounce a monster in the same column as this card, though, is a little bit too niche for it to be super useful. Especially since the ability that allows it to move into another monster card zone is shared amongst the once per turn between its bounce effect. So you can't both move this card to a zone another monster is in and then bounce it in the same turn. And since the card requires resources to bring out and has low attack, it's probably not going to stay around very long either. This card also came out before people really kept track of their columns and zones, so it definitely didn't see any play when it first came out. And at number 5, we have Laval Judgment Lord. This is a level 7 monster with 2700 attack, where it has the effect that once per turn you can banish a Laval monster in your graveyard to then inflict 1000 points of burn damage to your opponent. And also, this card cannot declare an attack the same turn it activates its effect. Now, the Laval archetype excels at getting Laval monsters in the graveyard, and then using them in the graveyard to activate effects, like Dust Flame Blast, which allows you to banish all the Laval monsters from your graveyard to destroy all of your opponent's cards. Or Searing Firewall to special summon a number of tokens for the Lavals you banish. Or even better, Rekindling to special summon as many Laval monsters from your graveyard as possible, just as long as they have exactly 200 defense, which most of them do. For being in an archetype with a whole bunch of fire theme, they don't actually do burn damage very often. And if your archetype doesn't focus on burn damage, then the full effect of a card being burn damage is generally not worth it. Unless it deals that burn damage as an extra effect, like Volcanic Scattershot, which can destroy all of your opponent's monsters and then deal 1500 points of burn damage on top of that. Although Laval Judgment Lord is a hard to bring out boss monster, whose only effect is to inflict 1000 burn damage, while having a cost and a drawback to that mediocre effect. It also does not have 200 defense, so you can't bring it out easily in their archetype, so you have to expend resources to get this card on the field, which is definitely not worth it. And at number 4, we have Ally of Justice Thunder Armor. This is a level 8 monster with 2700 attack, which has a restriction where it cannot be special summoned. And its effect is that if an Ally of Justice monster battles, you can inflict piercing battle damage if it attacks a defense position monster. Now, the Ally of Justice archetype is kind of a joke for how terrible a majority of their cards are. So, being able to grant those monsters piercing battle damage is not a big deal at all. And they thought this effect was so good that they had to have restrictions with how it could even be brought out, as it cannot be special summoned at all, which is an absolutely terrible restriction to have on a monster. That's usually the kind of effect you put on a card which has an absolute banger of an effect, like Vanity's Ruler, which also requires 2 tributes, cannot be special summoned, but has a really good effect where your opponent cannot special summon any monsters at all. Getting out Vanity's Ruler can win you the game. Getting out Ally of Justice Thunder Armor can allow your terrible Ally of Justice cards to maybe deal piercing battle damage. It does count itself in the piercing battle damage, so a 2700 attack beat stick with piercing damage is nice, but not if that's the full effect of the card. Piercing battle damage is a thing that's nice to have on top of another good effect, like Blackwing Boar of the Spear. And there's other cards with similar effects that are much easier to use, like Enraged Battleox, which grants piercing battle damage to 3 types of monsters, instead of just a very specific archetype. And Enraged Battleox doesn't restrict you from special summoning the card, and is also not very good, because being able to grant all your other cards piercing battle damage isn't a big deal, as shown by how Enraged Battleaxe grants 3 types and doesn't see competitive play in any of those types of decks. Well, not in the modern era anyway. It did see competitive play back in the day when it first came out, absolutely. But not Ally of Justice Thunder Armor. The ease of use of the card definitely factors into the playability of it. And at number 3, we have Dreadscythe Harvester. This is another low attack, high level monster, where it simply has the effect where you contribute 1 insect type monster to have this card gain 500 attack until the end of the turn. However, the thing to note about this effect is that it's not once per turn. So if you have a way to infinitely get cards on the field for its attribute, what you could do is not use it on this card and instead play Cannon Soldier to go for an FTK, as it would be both better and easier to accomplish since Cannon Soldier allows you to infinitely tribute cards for 500 points of burn damage without requiring them to be a specific type of monster. Although technically Dreadscythe Harvester could get to an infinite amount of attack if you have a way to infinitely tribute an insect type monster over and over. And there are some ways to do that with some banned cards in the game, but more realistically in a normal duel, this effect is incredibly weak. Having to tribute your cards in order to gain extra attack is generally not a good cost, because you have to expend resources in order to get a card on the field in the first place. So if you're then using it as a resource on the field, you better be granting yourself an amazing effect for all that effort, like the effect of Ballista Squad or Monster Gate. Only gaining 500 attack until the end of the turn is not what I would call an amazing effect worth the effort. In fact, gaining attack points is one of the weakest effects you can accomplish, and it's not even worth gaining the attack unless it's at least over 1,000. And in some cases it needs to be even higher than that for it to be even considered. We have cards like Guy, the Magical Knight of Dragons, which can gain 2600 attack every time it destroys something by battle, is easier to bring out, and even has spell speed 2 destruction, which doesn't really see competitive play because that's just not good enough in the TCG. And Guy, the Magical Knight of Dragons doesn't require you to expend resources in order to grant its attack. So when compared to Dreadscythe Harvester, there's definitely a big contrast between both of their effects, and you can kind of see why Dreadscythe Harvester has never seen any competitive play. And in fact, you'd be hard-pressed to see success of this card in casual environments as well. And at number 2, we have Diabolos, King of the Abyss. This is a card which cannot be special summoned, and when you tribute summon this card, its tributes must be Dark Attribute. And what do you get for these incredibly restrictive summoning conditions? Well, the card has a passive effect where it cannot be tributed by card effects, and once per turn during your opponent's draw phase, you get to look at the top card of your opponent's deck when they draw a card, and then either place that card back on top of their deck, or on the bottom of their deck. And what kind of benefits can you get from looking at a card your opponent's about to draw? Well, you get information on that one card, which might allow you to use something like Mind Crush to get rid of that card in their hand. Or if you don't have Mind Crush and the card you looked at would be a really good card in their hand, you can choose to put it on the bottom of their deck so they draw something else that's maybe not as good. Basically, what I'm trying to say is the effect isn't very good. It's technically a positive effect, but it doesn't really result in a change in game state. And if all you want to do is gain information on your opponent's hand, there are much better cards you can use instead of a hard to bring out level 7 main deck monster, like a Pointer of the Red Lotus for example. However, since the card cannot be tributed, according to Wikipedia tips, you could play it in an Ectoplasmer stall deck, where when it gets to your end phase and you would have to tribute a monster, you won't have to tribute Diabolos because he's immune to the effect of that card. They did create a retrained version of the card called Darkest Diabolos Lord of the Lair, which is actually a much better boss monster. It also has an effect where it can't be tributed, but only by your opponent's card effects, and it also cannot be targeted by your opponent's card effects either. Then it has the effect where, if a dark monster you control is tributed, you can special summon this card from your hand or graveyard. In addition, it has the effect where you can tribute a dark monster in order to force your opponent to place one card in their hand on the top or bottom of their deck, which is much better than what Diabolos King of the Abyss could do. Darkest Diabolos Lord of the Lair shares a hard once per turn between both its special summon and hand rip effect, so you can't use both of them on the same turn. But the card brings itself out super easily, and you can tribute your opponent's monsters to activate its other effect, as long as you have its field spell card out, Lair of Darkness. And in fact, Darkest Diabolos is so good that it's kind of funny that it's based on a really bad monster from the early days of the game, with effects that are only slightly similar to the original card, just given an actual good effect without crazy restrictions. And at number 1, we have Insect Queen. This is a level 7 monster with 2200 attack, the lowest base attack of all the monsters on this list, if you ignore the question mark attack from the number 10 spot. And it has the effect where it gains 200 attack for each insect type monster on the field. Once per turn during the end phase, if it destroys a monster by battle, you get to special summon a level 1 token with 100 attack and defense and attack position. And also, this card cannot declare an attack unless you tribute one monster, so it has the same attack restriction as Panther Warrior. Although the reason Panther Warrior has its restriction is because it's a high attack level 4 monster, which means it's easy to bring out. And the restrictions on having this high attack level monster is that it must tribute in order to attack. Insect Queen is a high level monster with low attack, so it doesn't make sense to have the same restriction, like at all. And sure, it does special summon a token if it destroys something by battle, but not until the end of the turn. So it could theoretically fuel its own effect, as long as you're able to pay the cost for it with some other card the first time you attack with it, if you're able to find a way to stop your opponent from destroying any of your other cards, as Insect Queen doesn't offer any other kind of protection, and it's just a liability to keep on the field, since it can't do anything without tributing your other cards, and it summons a low attack token in attack position. And like I explained with Dreadscythe Harvester, generally tributing a card better be attached to a really good effect, otherwise it's not worth it. Unless you combo it with Lair of Darkness, where you can tribute one of your opponent's cards when it declares an attack. Although generally, there's much better uses of Lair of Darkness than with Insect Queen. And just like with Diabolos, they released a retrained version of Insect Queen to try to make it better, while only loosely basing the new card effects on the old one. Metamorphosed Insect Queen is a 2800 attack monster, which has a restriction where it cannot be normal summoned or set, and must be special summoned by a card effect. Although since it doesn't restrict it from being special summoned with different kinds of card effects, and you wouldn't want to tribute summon the card anyway, that's generally not a big deal. And while it's on the field, if you control another insect type monster, then all of your insect type monsters on the field cannot be targeted or destroyed by your opponent's card effects, so it grants itself and all your other insects excellent protection. Then it has the effect where at the end of the damage step, if this card attacked, you can tribute one monster to have this card attack another monster again in a row. And during the end phase, once per turn, you get to special summon a token. Although you can choose to put it in defense position instead of only attack position, like the original Insect Queen does for some reason, which just makes that really low attack token incredibly vulnerable during your opponent's turn. And Metamorphosed Insect Queen doesn't need to destroy monsters by battle to special summon a token during the end phase. You just get one by default. So it's much better than the original card in pretty much every way, where it can tribute cards to attack an additional time instead of just that one time. It gets the token for free at the end of each player's turns, it has a higher baseline attack, and it offers all of your monsters really good protection. The original Insect Queen has low attack, can't do anything without expending resources, and if it does destroy something by battle, you have to summon a low attack token in attack position at the end of the turn, which makes you vulnerable to big swings by your opponent. The original Insect Queen is so bad that I think it deserves number 1 spot on this list, even if technically it is easier to bring out than Diabolos or Ally of Justice Thunder Armor, since it can be special summoned, although it's not as useful in the field as those other 2 cards, because you have to expend so much resources to just allow this card to do its effects, where you don't really get anything in return to be worth that effort. Alright, and that's the list. Believe it or not, this video idea was actually a suggestion from a previous video. I thought it was a great idea not having any cards that can special summon themselves, which made for a completely unique list of cards that were never talked about in previous videos. So if you have any ideas for future videos like this one, I'd love to hear about them down in the comments. And also, make sure to watch the playlist on all the other worst of top 10s.